Hi, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video I'm going to be doing a portrait. This will be showing you my process, how I go about starting out from the drawing through to the actual oil painting. It will be an alla prima painting, so I'll do it in one shot. Please hit the subscribe button down the bottom or leave me a comment. Thanks for watching. So to start off with, I'd like to take you through my drawing process when I do a portrait. So the purpose of these two lines that I've just drawn here, one vertical, one horizontal, are the same two lines as would relate to the reference. And obviously from there I can then measure up vertically all of my distances going that way, and then obviously from the plumb line going down I can measure out to any distances going horizontally. And this just helps obviously with proportions and spacing between elements within the picture. So for the next part of the process, I'm just going to put it on double speed because it will take quite a while to draw this. So these are the last few marks within the drawing, just tidying up some edges, making some edges a little bit more positive. And once I've done this, I'm just going to fix the charcoal and get ready for painting. These are the materials I'll be using for today's video. So I've got some flat brushes, synthetic brushes here, then some smaller filberts, some stiffer hog brushes, and then a selection of rounds and some odd brushes down there I may use for a little bit of blending if necessary, and a palette knife. Colour wise, these are the colours that I'll be using. So we have titanium white, some sap green, some dark cyan purple, or Windsor purple sometimes it's called, some burnt umber, some ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, burnt sienna, cadmium orange, and then on the end there we have a Windsor yellow. The colours from my tubes now transferred onto the palette, and we're ready now to get on and start painting. So here we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is to start to block in, just taking some titanium white, because this is actually a sort of a snow scene. So the model has actually got a big hood on, big furry hood, and behind that we've got some nice sort of snowy colours. So I'm actually going to take a little bit of the Windsor yellow and some white, possibly a tiny bit of the alizarin, just to sort of pink it up a little bit, and start to block some of this on. It's not really to kill the white as such just yet, it's just to give me some context for the background. It's a little bit more pink. And I'm not laying it down in any kind of particular, trying to represent anything specific. It's just to give me something to paint into as I go along. I find that with oil painting, you tend to need to have a little bit of, just putting a little bit of ultramarine blue in there, you tend to need to have a little bit of colour on, or a little bit of paint on the canvas first, to be able to manipulate the paints easier whilst the canvas is uncovered. The paint doesn't move quite as easily, so you're having to push the brush. That's why at the moment I'm using a stiffer brush, and as the painting progresses I'll change then to more synthetic brushes, as the paint will move a little bit easier on the palette, on the canvas. So just a little bit more blue into those colours. Still trying to keep them pretty light, but just a mixture of very pale blues and purples, yellows and so on, just in the background there, just to start off, get that started, so that I can start to work into that edge. A bit more blue, a little bit more red. Might be a bit strong, but we'll try it. If it's too strong later, I can always knock it down. Okay, so now I'm going to get into we'll start off getting some colour into the hood. So I'm going to take a bit of burnt sienna, into those sort of whiter colours that I've just been using, and I may just lighten it a touch more to start off with. There's a bit of burnt umber as well. The burnt umber is not quite as vibrant as the burnt sienna. Might be a bit too light. Be okay to start with. And in a way I'm trying to lay the paint down. I don't really want to blend, I don't really like the blended look within my oil paintings. So I tend to just let the colours mix more on the canvas through a process of laying one colour in and onto another colour, and helping and letting the tones do most of the work. So rather than blend two colours together, I'll tend to just let the paint mix like that. I've just put a bit of blue into there, but trying to keep the tone of the colour about the same as the colours that I've put on. And that then allows me to bring that colour into what I've already got without it jumping too far out of the picture. So a bit more of the ultramarine and burnt sienna together, and a bit of the white, sort of a grey, a bit greyer. Grey's a very unrated colour. I think need grey in paintings to help the other colours shine. If you have a painting it's just got bright colours everywhere, it's very difficult for the areas that you do want to be more saturated with colour to actually show up, because it's having to fight all those other areas that you've already over brightened. Okay, so a bit more brown, I think a little bit of yellow in there. So I'm mixing all of this in the same area on the palette, and that's quite important because it helps me to see whether the colours are roughly the same tone or not. And obviously if I mix a colour that's gone too strong or too dark, I can just adjust it according to what's around it, the colours that I've already mixed, as opposed to having to fight the colours. So a little bit more white, maybe a little bit of the cadmium yellow there, orange there, just to brighten out. See how that's made the colour get a lot lighter, because it's a very powerful colour, cadmium yellow, orange. So I'm just going to darken that with a little bit of brown again. Bring some of that into the hood. I'm not really going to fuss with the edge too much just yet, because that's where all my nice light colours are going to come. I just want to transition some of these greys on the edge of the hood. So all the way up to the top and then back to my greys, so a bit more blue in there. Obviously blue and orange work very well together because they're complementary, so if you want to desaturate your oranges, just put some blue in it. More white. That'll give me a warm grey. So you want to be thinking about warm colours, cool colours. So if I want to go more cool in the grey, I add more blue. Just being careful not to push the tone too dark, because obviously every time you add a piece of colour into a mix, the tone could shift, and some colours do that more than others. So you just have to pay attention when you're mixing to not let it shift too far in comparison to everything else you've painted. The flip side though of tonal work is you don't want to make everything too close in tone, otherwise the whole painting becomes very muted, unless that's what you're going for. But you can start off working from the middle, as some artists do. They work from the middle out, so they'll lay all their medium tones down and then work out towards their darkest darks and lightest lights, and sometimes that could be quite an effective way of painting as well. Okay, so that's probably enough of that. I'm going to clean the brush and just step back and have a look, see what I've got. So working now into the towards the face, I'm actually going to put in, looks like she's got a hood or a hoodie on underneath the fur, the kind of the fur top of the coat. So I'm going to bring some greys, bluey greys, so just taking some burnt umber and some ultramarine to give me a nice grey, and start to bring this in. It needs to go darker, so more burnt umber and ultramarine together, because obviously as the hood goes in and under the fur lining, it casts more of a shadow. So I need to bring that up, all those colours up and then into those existing colours. And then down. And again, I don't really want to fiddle too much with this, I just want to get all of these elements in. first, so that I can see where I am, and then start to build out from there. So to clean the brush off, all I'm doing is just taking some tissue and then just wiping it off. I'm using trying not to use any medium in the paint at all, purely because I find personally that if I start to put too much medium in there, it will start to get very slippery, and it's harder to layer the paint over one another because there's too much medium in the lower layers. So I tend to just use the paint neat. It's a little bit harder in the early stages because obviously you don't have any paint on the canvas, so you have to make the paint work a little bit harder to push it around. But like I said earlier, if once you've got some paint on your painting, it's then much easier to then manipulate. So it's a good idea not to fiddle too much in these early stages by wanting to create too much detail or finessing edges. I just want to get the colour on, and then I can come back afterwards and start to make it work as I want it to. It's just going slightly darker in my grey now, just the burnt umber and the ultramarine again. And it's quite a nice neutral grey, or bluishy grey I should say. So just coming all the way out until it hits the coat, which is about there. And I know there's a lot more variation going on in these greys, but that's all going to come later. Just trying to paint it flat for the moment, and then I'll layer it up in another pass. So that comes all the way down and then in to the coat. And then there's a little bit of that grey. It's not quite as dark, but I'm going to bring some grey in here because it will have a nice cooling effect on the cheek as I get the warmer colours in the cheek later. Oops, gone over there, but never mind. Okay. And then I want to bring a little bit more of the fur colour, so the browns I was using earlier. Touch of blue in it. Touch it to the painting just to confirm that I've got roughly the right tone. If when I touch it to the painting it starts to stand out too much, then obviously I need to adjust it. So it's a good tip for getting your tones right, is just to take that moment to just double check the colour before you start painting with it. As many times, and a lot of times people will complain, students will complain that can't get the right colour, can't get the right tone. But more often than not it's because they're just not paying enough attention when they're laying the colour down to whether it is the right tone or not. Not the right colour, the right tone. So that's, for me, that's more important than the colour. And obviously colourists would disagree with that, but that's fine. It's just the way that I like to paint. Okay, so now I need to get some stronger tones now under the hood before I can get into the face. So I'm going to use I'm going to go slightly purpley, bit of orange in it. So using some of the dark cyan purple and some of the cadmium orange, start to build some darks in. So it's very dark under this hood edge. And in a way this is kind of defining my most, or the darkest darks that I'm going to have in the painting. So I'm just going to try and draw with it a little bit to keep the shape. In fact, I could probably have a little bit of that up in there as well, because there are some quite dark elements underneath the hood. And then again down the bottom of the neck, a bit more purple. So I don't really want to go too much darker, so I'm just going to put a bit more orange in it, just to keep the tone roughly the same. So the cheek kind of comes up, and then kind of turns into a scarf, I think, here. Looks like a scarf anyway. Even if it's not, it's going to become a scarf. So I'm going to go slightly bluer now. So this is going to make the colour jump, so it's going to get darker. So I need to shift that back down to the tone that it was. So I'm going to need a little bit of white, which will desaturate the colour a little bit, but it will bring the tone back down, so that it doesn't get too dark on me. And then I can have some of that same colour out on this edge, just with some quite abstract brush marks, because obviously this edge is going to be very furry, so I don't want it to be too detailed. I'm going to work into all of this. And then we've got some sort of abstract marks out here. Not really fussed about what's going on there, just to give it a little bit of shape. And then the coat, a bit more blue. It's quite a blue coat in places. I'm going to start to get this drawn in, so we're coming out from collar, comes down and then around, and then it goes up. Sort of makes a zigzag shape, and then it just disappears into the shadow. And we can bring that same dark blue as a shadow down. It's being cast by the hood. So it comes down, and then it makes a nice shape, and then out of the picture. So a big part of painting in general is just looking for shapes and their relationships. Oops, nice hair in the painting there. Let's get rid of that. Some of my hog brushes are getting a bit old and they need a bit of attention sometimes. Keep dropping hairs. So this is nice and dark, and then we'll darken this up and then away. Give a bit of shoulder there. Okay, I'm going to step back and see what I've got now. Right, so I'm just going to get the rest of the coat blocked in. The jacket. So still using the ultramarine. So the ultramarine blue, bit of white, bit of the burnt sienna in there as well. Let's just grey it down a bit. Might be too light. Let's just have a look. a little bit light. We can use that on the half tones. So there's some light being cast across the shoulder here. I'm just going to put a few of these little half tony colours in. And then I need to darken that up, so more blue, a bit more brown, burnt umber, just to darken the tone. A bit darker still. So obviously when you put white into any of your paint mixes, to get a very dark is actually incredibly difficult. So you're better off sometimes just starting a new mix if you want to go very dark, because the white will always pollute the dark colours. It'll always make them a little bit more matte, and you won't get very darks. But for this instance, it doesn't matter too much, because I can come back later and then add some more dark accents to the painting. I just want to get the majority of the white blocked out before I start, as I said, finessing anything. So that's actually the scarf coming down there. So this is all very dark. Let's block this in. Blue, a bit more brown. Get some nice darks in here. Become a bit bluer. Touch lighter. Okay, I'll lose these little bits of white. And just make this quite dark. A bit of burnt sienna as well, because obviously all of this dark will really help to pull the eye into the main focal point, which is hopefully the face. So I'm not too bothered about these areas, I just want to fill them in. But in filling them in, I want to try and keep some interest in the brushwork, so that's why I'm not just painting it in a very flat fashion. I want to keep the energy level up, so scrub the brush and let it move around. Okay, that's probably enough for the moment. I'll clean the brush off and then I'm going to start to look to get some colours in the face now. Going to clean a little bit of space on the palette. Just wipe that off. And then start some skin tone mixes. So taking some titanium white, and I'm going to drop in there a little bit of crimson, alizarin crimson, touch of burnt umber, become a bit darker. So that's just alizarin crimson and burnt umber, darker still, because obviously the skin is away from the light, so we don't need it to be too light here, otherwise we won't get that sort of in the shadow effect. Might be a bit too unsaturated. Need a bit more colour in there, but it's fine to start off with. And then what I'm doing now is looking at the reference, squinting, and trying to lay in these colours in a relatively logical way, in terms of the way that the the structure of the face is, and also the way that the skin is undulating. So we'll have some on the chin. So obviously, this being a human face, there's a lot of anatomy that you have to kind of try and think about as you're painting. And a good way of learning that is to actually study a skull, or look at the shape of the skull at least, to know what elements line up with what. For example, like the cheekbone lining up with or drawing a line back to the ear, the brow line, those kinds of things, so that you get an understanding of what's going on, what you're actually looking at, because it's very, very hard to actually paint things sometimes when you don't know what they're actually doing. It's incredibly difficult. So now I'm just putting in a bit of lighter tone to get a change of direction. So I think I've got some reflected light coming back into this area. So actually normally these areas are quite dark, but because of the way the light is in this image, they're actually quite light. So the under part of the nose is light. The chin and so on is all fairly light, when normally it would be reasonably dark, or darker than other elements. So just lay a bit of this lighter colour. Need to become a bit more cherry in the cheek, because obviously to say that it's quite a cold environment, I want a bit more red in there. So bring that into the cheek line there. The wing of the nose can be a bit warmer. Up into the eye. Touch. The lips are very warm, but we'll do that in a moment. We'll take a little bit of green now, touch of sap green into that mix, and a touch of white, because green will help to just desaturate the reds and make them cooler, so the philtrum, or the line down from the nose, is a lot cooler. So I'm just going to block that in, and then we've got some cooler bits on the ridge of the top lip. Coming down from the wing of the nose, it's a bit lighter. Okay, and then now I'm going to get some slightly darker elements in now to pull all that together. And these will need to be a little bit greyer. So ultramarine blue and those brown colours that I put on in the first instance, just to get some cooler tones as well as warm tones. We want some cooler tones in the skin, a bit darker, just a little bit, so a bit more brown in there. Just to start to shape up the chin. It kind of comes down and then turns the corner. Starts to get very warm on the edge there. I need to tidy that edge up in a minute. Just take a straighter brush and put some of my bluey purples back in. Tidy that edge up. So this is now a synthetic brush and a straight edge so that I can actually cut in and draw with, because the hog brushes that I've got on don't have very good edges to them. So this is just so that I can tidy up and keep the drawing reasonably accurate. I don't mind if it goes a little bit wonky, but if you let all of it go too wonky, then it can sometimes run away with you. Okay, so back to applying this. A little bit of orange in there, a bit too much orange, a bit of white, just to bring the tone back down. A little bit of red as well. So it's all about modulation, so you're just bumping the colours around one way, bumping it the other way. I mean, very rarely when I paint do I stick to just one colour. I like to try and get interesting interplays with the colours. From one to the next, and sometimes that means that you can't really be too bothered about getting exactly the right colour. You just have to guess sometimes as what, you know, your best guess. So the cheek is kind of here and down from the nose, and just having a look to see what that line's doing. Okay, the tones in this face are very, very subtle, so it's going to need a lot of pushing and pulling of tones. And playing around with. So I think for the next part of the video, rather than capture every single stroke, I'll just speed it up, and once I got to a stage where I think it needs a bit more information, I will put it back on video again. The final stages of the painting now, just finessing edges, putting a little bit more light to increase the form, and darkening some of the shadows, just to finish off the painting. Here are the last few strokes, and this is the final piece.